When the TV crew was setting up its lights and other equipment in the house and the barn, Martha followed them around like a bloodhound, constantly reminding them that if there was any damage to her property, there'd be hell to pay. At one point, Martha spotted some dents in the floor and became enraged. Suddenly, she's going around checking the women's shoes to see who's wearing heels that might have dented the floor, a crew member recounted. Martha also berated her grieving sister Laura, who then quit the kitchen detail, and she had a tiff with Robin Fairclough, whom crew members saw crying. Also present in Martha's entourage were several pretty Scandinavian girls, who were helpers, and whom she treated like her whipping girls, a crew member recalled. She humiliated them. She ridiculed them. They were very attractive, and she seemed to be threatened by them, so she treated them terribly. She talked to them in low, cutting voices, as if to say, "You don't deserve to exist if you don't do this right." She was constantly correcting them. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Chair Denise. We're going to keep going in the Martha Stewart book today. And the last time we read about how just generally abusive she was to everybody. Everybody in her life faced her wrath. Her mother, her siblings. Andy, of course, is under constant abuse. She's a control freak, and if he's having any fun, she freaks out, like literally freaks out if she thinks that he is having any fun. We heard yesterday about how abusive she was about the guys that she would hire. It was a very strange thing because she seemed to have great disdain for people who are gay, but then she always would hire gay people, but then seemed like grossed out and weirded out by them. I mean, she was a complete bundle of contradictions, this woman. And if we have wondered about her mental stability all along the way, that chapter really cemented in my mind that something was exceedingly wrong with her. But I do think a lot of it goes down to the fact that she never slept at night. I mean, you can't maintain your sanity if you're never getting a good night's rest. So anyway, I think it was beyond the fact that she was tired, but I don't think that helped. Well, this chapter today is entitled, I Ought to Be in Pictures. So let's get going. From the beginning, Martha's goal was to be on television. "I trade my mother to be on the tube," was a constant refrain. The Today Show gave her early national exposure when Willard Scott, the goofy weather guy, was assigned to Turkey Hill a couple of times to do features on the lifestyle lady. For example, bleary-eyed viewers across the country were treated to live coverage of the seemingly happy Stewarts having their morning coffee together, views of their exotic gardens, and the lady of the house prepping the Thanksgiving holiday bird. But what Martha desperately wanted was her own show. With a generous introduction from Norma Collier, who had been put through the Vegematic over the years by her friend, Martha met a Washington, D.C. television executive, Peter Murray, who thought he could successfully package her. "I told Peter I'll introduce you to her, but be careful that she doesn't screw you," Collier recalled. Peter said, "Oh, Norma, I never thought you were the type to be so jealous. Why would you say that?" And I said, "Peter, if she screws you because you haven't been careful, I'm just going to say I told you so." And within 6 months, Peter called me up and said, "That bitch!" And I said, "Huh, I told you so." At the time, Murray was president of Wedacom, the production arm of Weta TV, the public broadcasting station in the nation's capital. While Wedacom was generating a lot of production business, none of it was very visible. Murray and his boss, Ward Chamberlain, president of Weta, chairman of Wedacom, and a big gun in public television, had been searching for the kind of original programming that was coming out of the production units of the stations in New York and Boston. Both thought Martha was the answer to their problem. When entertaining came out, Martha seemed like a natural for television, Murray observed later. The momentum had taken over. The country's interest in Martha Stewart had come alive because she was so well produced by herself and by Andy. The production values in entertaining were enormous. It was a very attractive package. The Stewarts really knew what they were doing in terms of product, and the product wasn't entertaining. It was Martha Stewart herself. And they had that in mind from the beginning. Certainly Martha Stewart had that in mind. After Murray met Martha, he came to the conclusion that, quote, she was a crazy, extremely focused, extremely driven, hard-working person who was just single-minded about becoming a big success. Martha was extremely aware of what she had created with entertaining and who she created it for. She saw herself as a personality. So television is what it had to be for her. Getting on television is what drove her. She had TV on her mind all along. That I know. She sure as hell didn't see herself as a caterer. Murray, who'd heard a lot of horror stories about Martha over the years, had an informal meeting or two with her and came away actually liking the woman. She was charming and fun, he said. In fact, during the time they were talking about getting together on a possible TV project, he escorted her to a fancy black tie benefit in Washington attended by George Bush, then Ronald Reagan's vice president. It was at that event that Murray saw Martha, the operator, in action for the first time. Every countess in the place, Martha knew who they were, and was up next to them every second. he recalled. She has enormous confidence and terrific skills in being charming to whom she wants to be charming. When George Bush walked in, she made a beeline to him, immediately got the photographer and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Vice President, but would you have your picture taken with me?" Obviously, at an event like that, Martha's all business. During one of their initial get-togethers at Turkey Hill, Martha told Murray enthusiastically, "If you want to see what's going on, come with me." A few days later, the two flew to Boston, where Martha had a speaking engagement. Already a true believer, Murray was left staggered by what he witnessed in Beantown. She was promoting her book in a museum, and there were a couple of hundred women there, and these women all looked like her, he said, still amazed years later. It was incredible. If there was such a thing as middle-aged, upscale women groupies, Martha had them as followers. And that was an amazing target audience. I watched her play to those women, and I watched the audience, and it was as if they were undergoing a religious experience. Murray returned to Wedacom headquarters, briefed Ward Chamberlain, and got the green light to cut a development deal with their newfound messiah. "Peter had what was a hell of a good idea, which was to involve Martha in a program with us," Chamberlain said. Shortly before Quick Cook was published, a series of meetings was held between Murray and the Stewarts, with Andy acting as Martha's agent. Wedacom wanted exclusive television rights to Martha, with the objective of producing a lifestyle program and selling it to a national sponsor. Martha didn't approach TV like, "Gee, maybe I'll get lucky and get on TV." Murray gathered from his conversation with her that it was, "I am going to have a television show, and it's a matter of how best to do it." Andy was advising her on the contract that we put together, but it was very clear that Martha was the one in charge. While he was a tough negotiator, it was all Martha. After they had hammered out an agreement in principle, Chamberlain asked to meet Wedacom's new Golden Girl in person before the contract was formally signed. Martha, who wanted to get a take on him too, threw a seal-the-deal meal, knocking the waspy Chamberlain's Argyle socks off by cooking duck in the fireplace, something he'd never seen done before. Chamberlain was sold, and the deal was signed. One key clause demanded by Andy permitted Martha to walk with a chunk of change if Wedacom didn't deliver an acceptable project in a specific amount of time. The next step was to put together a pilot, which Murray planned to use as a selling tool. He hired a producer from a glitzy New York ad agency who spent what Wedacom managing producer Jeffrey Miller called a shitload of money to assemble a bad slideshow. But those problems were nothing compared with the star herself, who drove Miller up the wall during visits to Wedacom's Arlington, Virginia studios. "It was," he proclaimed, "one of the worst experiences I have ever had in production." At Weta TV, which produced McNeil Lair and other Inside the Beltway programming, Miller had rubbed shoulders with some of the best and the brightest. As a producer, I trained George Shultz to handle hostile reporters. Then Secretary of Defense McNamara was also around. I was used to government figures of fairly high stature. Even though they might show up in limousines and certainly were powerful people, they weren't prima donnas. Martha Stewart was a prima donna. She felt a sense of entitlement that was incredible. She just kind of flowed through the Weta studios in a floor-length mink, acting incredibly arrogant and star-like. She didn't want to record at particular times, and she wouldn't do retakes. She was particularly difficult. She was cold and aloof. She insisted on being waited on. She was very impatient. "When can we do this? And why can't we do this right away? And why do I have to sit there? And what are we waiting for? I want to get out of here." I found her terribly affected in terms of her intonation and her delivery. But she was very good at performing. The pilot used existing videotapes of Martha's appearance on various talk shows, plus a new voiceover. But the final cut was dull. Peter Murray thought the tape needed some juice, so he arranged to have a film crew present at Turkey Hill for one of Martha's parties. As it turned out, the bash was an event staged by Richard Jeffrey, who was shooting a feature for one of Martha's New York Times home entertaining issues. Jeffrey thought the party might be dull, and had arranged for a mariachi band to be present. But Martha and Lexi livened things up when they got into a shouting match reportedly over Lexi's outfit, a pair of bib overalls with no shirt on underneath, leaving her ample breasts essentially exposed. With the tape finally completed and edited, Peter Murray hit the road to find a sponsor and a syndicator. Through a colleague, he got a meeting with one of the biggest television syndicators in the business at the time. It was a session he would not soon forget. "This guy went berserk," he said to my colleague and myself. "You're an effing idiot. How dare you bring in this Connecticut snob's book and that tape and put it on my desk? No one's interested in Martha Stewart. No one ever will be." It was the first time I'd ever been thrown out of an office in my life. In short order, though, Murray did find a potential sponsor for Martha after talking to a number of advertising agency people in charge of television production for corporate clients. At Compton Advertising, then one of the top 10 on Madison Avenue, the key man in the program developing group adored Martha and thought her taped presentation was fabulous. He took the idea to the account people, who also signed off on it for Procter & Gamble and its product Dawn, a dishwashing detergent. The Compton people wanted either a syndicated program or a show for the burgeoning cable market. The program's concept still needed to be developed. Under a tentative agreement, Martha was to do 13 shows out of Washington in return for a talent fee of $50,000. The Wedacom executives thought they'd gotten a bargain. But not long after Murray struck the deal with Compton, he left Wedacom, after reportedly losing a power struggle with another executive for Chamberlain's favor. I turned the project over to Ward and the group at Wedacom and said, "Here you go." Ward was very much interested in the Martha project. He was in lockstep with me all along the way. 6 months later, though, Murray heard from his man at Compton that Martha had reneged on the whole deal, had opted out. She abided by the conditions of the contract, but the show never happened. Michael Cunningham, the chief financial officer for Weta at the time, said that Wedacom's agreement with Martha included a window during which time she would not entertain other offers and be exclusively ours. It ran its course and that window expired. We paid her something in order to keep that window. Jeffrey Miller said the show was never developed because Peter Murray was really the driving force behind it and there was nobody to follow up. Years later, Ward Chamberlain, who had become vice president and managing director of WNET-TV in New York, exclaimed, "Good night. I wish we had put that show through in some way. Martha was a terrific talent." Well, I'm not surprised that nobody really wanted to work with Martha Stewart. In order just to make some kind of promo, she was acting like a diva, walking around in a floor-length mink coat. What is this? Like, what year did she think this was? Prancing around and acting as though she knew what was going on and that her impressions of what ought to be happening were the right ones. And I mean, who would have even wanted to go down that path? The show didn't happen because she's a disagreeable person. And if she had been a really super pleasant person that people were looking forward to working with, I'm sure that people would have been able to see the value in adding her onto their list of shows. But if you're going to be a nightmare, who's going to champion your cause to have a TV show? From the moment she signed to Writing Entertaining, Martha had been nudging Alan Merkin and Carol Southern to let her do television and home videos tied to the themes of her books. She was determined to get into video, Merkin acknowledged. She was anticipating what later became her successful television program. Martha wanted to do video. We respected Martha. We did video. Simple as that. Martha tied both the first television special, produced by Boston's WGBH-TV, and her first mail-order video, distributed by Crown Video, together in a big red bow in 1986, and called it Holiday Entertaining with Martha Stewart. The production, underwritten by Pepperidge Farms, Swift Eichrecht Butterball Turkeys, and Sterling Vineyards, was shot months before the show actually aired at Thanksgiving. Martha had the drive to move forward with the complex project despite an already full plate. Crown had hoped to bring out her wedding book at the end of the year, and the Clark Potter people were screaming for the manuscript, but Martha was far, far behind schedule. At the same time, her personal life was in shambles. Andy had already brought up the subject of a separation, and Lexi, finishing Barnard, was more alienated than ever. Also, another horrific tragedy had struck Martha's sister Laura, and its impact had a devastating effect on everyone in the Kostira and Stewart families. After a long, troubled period, Laura Kostira had finally found happiness with Kim Herbert, a handsome, budding actor whom she met while working for Laura's catering company, which supplied boxed lunches for the cast and crew of the Stratford American Shakespeare Festival Theater in Stratford, Connecticut. Laura and Kimmy were a perfect match, his stepmother, Janice Herbert, declared. The two fell in love, and after a quick courtship were married at Turkey Hill, an old-fashioned wedding that Martha naturally produced and featured in the chapter of Entertaining entitled Afternoon Cocktail Reception for 50. A likable young man, described by one friend as an Adonis, Herbert was the son of Leo Herbert, who for decades had been Broadway producer David Merrick's property manager, and in that capacity was a beloved member of the Broadway theater community, having been involved in more than 120 shows on the Great White Way over the years. Laura and Kim moved into his one-bedroom apartment near Times Square, and not long after, Laura gave birth to the first of their two children, a son, Christopher. To support his small family, Herbert, who wasn't a very good actor, according to his stepmother, worked as a propman with his father and bought a small company that manufactured mirrored disco balls. Because the apartment became too small, Kim, Laura, and the baby moved into the Kostira homestead in Nutley, where the widowed matriarch was living by herself. She was very able and was having an enjoyable life and really didn't need to have them in at that time, Janice Herbert observed. It was difficult because she's a hard lady and a tough lady who wants to take over. And Laura and she just didn't seem to get along too well. Not long after the move, Laura had another baby, Sophie. In early May 1986, around the time Martha was in pre-production for her first TV special, on which Laura was scheduled to make an appearance, Kim Herbert complained of stomach pains. His doctor sent him to the hospital, where appendicitis was misdiagnosed. Herbert, in fact, had a very aggressive form of lymphatic cancer. Herbert was 32, about to turn 33 later in the month. He didn't know it at the time, but he had 5 months left to live. Like Ethel Stewart, Herbert's birth mother was a staunch Christian Scientist. At first, though, Herbert sought medical treatment at Sloan Kettering, where Andy had undergone treatment for his cancer. They thought they could save Kimmy, but it was such an aggressive cancer, Janice Herbert said. They were trying everything. They were drilling holes in his head to treat him with chemotherapy. They were using him as a guinea pig almost. Finally, Herbert gave up his treatments and got deeply involved in the Christian Science Church because, as his stepmother noted, he was trying desperately to live. In October 1986, a month after Martha's show was aired, he died. As Martha's holiday special got into production, Herbert's fatal illness and Laura's panicked and depressed state hung like a pall over everyone. Except, it seemed, Martha, who believed in the adage, "The show must go on." Acting as if nothing untoward was happening, she performed like a seasoned trooper. At least that's how it appeared to viewers, who saw Martha at her charming best, happily touring a cranberry bog in thigh-high rubber boots, cheerfully making puff pastry for the outside of the turkey, an idea she'd lifted from a family friend, gleefully selecting the table settings for her antique cupboard and grandly picking from her garden a huge pumpkin that she magically turned into a soup tureen. The final dinner scene showed what appeared to be all the members of Martha's family, the folks all of Martha's readers had become familiar with from her books, pretending to be happy and enjoying themselves. To viewers, especially Martha's growing legion of fans, it looked perfect. It wasn't. For one thing, the two most important people in Martha's life, her husband and her daughter, were missing from the picture. Andy and Lexi refused to participate as human props in still another of Martha's commercial ventures. Behind the scenes, a variety of weird and wacky events also occurred, one of which would have shocked Martha's fans. In one broadcast sequence, Martha was shown taking sumptuous-looking game hens out of the Turkey Hill smokehouse. But before that scene had been shot, the smokehouse actually caught fire, causing what one crew member later described as a hysterically funny Keystone Cop scene. Flames shooting out of the little structure had alerted Martha to the emergency, and she had frantically raced to the scene of the blaze, dragging a garden hose, followed by various blasé crew people, faux concerned family members, smirking kitchen assistants, and a macho Brazilian groundskeeper. When they reached the blaze, Martha discovered that the hose was too short. Hightailing it back to the main house, with everyone in her wake, she got a hose extension and returned to the scene, where someone aimed a weak stream of water at the roof to put out the fire, which had been touched off by melting fat from the little dinner birds. Martha was jumping up and down, a crew member recalled. She was just totally freaked, hysterical. The birds were pretty crispy critters by that point, but still usable for the scene. Meanwhile, Martha had gotten into a shooting match with the groundskeeper, whom she fired on the spot in front of everyone after he talked back to her. "Leave my property this minute," Martha snarled. Infuriated, he got into his car and drove off. 10 minutes later, Martha realized she'd forgotten to retrieve the big ring he had in his possession that held the key to every lock at Turkey Hill. Said an eyewitness, Martha really freaked out. She's saying, "Oh shit, I just fired that Latino and he's got my keys. What if he comes back and cuts my throat in my sleep?" Worried, Martha telephoned an off-duty Westport cop and hired him to stay on guard over the property to prevent the fired groundskeeper from returning. When the TV crew was setting up its lights and other equipment in the house and the barn, Martha followed them around like a bloodhound, constantly reminding them that if there was any damage to her property, there'd be hell to pay. At one point, Martha spotted some dents in the floor and became enraged. Suddenly, she's going around checking the women's shoes to see who's wearing heels that might have dented the floor, a crew member recounted. Martha also berated her grieving sister Laura, who then quit the kitchen detail, and she had a tiff with Robin Fairclough, whom crew members saw crying. Also present in Martha's entourage were several pretty Scandinavian girls, who were helpers, and whom she treated like her whipping girls, a crew member recalled. She humiliated them. She ridiculed them. They were very attractive, and she seemed to be threatened by them, so she treated them terribly. She talked to them in low, cutting voices, as if to say, "You don't deserve to exist if you don't do this right." She was constantly correcting them. The program's tech-turned-producer-director, Christopher Gilbert, also had his hands full with the diva. He was having problems communicating with her, a crew member recalled. He'd give her instructions in a very polite way about content, and if she didn't like his criticisms or suggestions, she would turn and twist things around and make it appear that he wasn't being very appreciative of her, or that he wasn't being polite to her. She was very manipulative in that way. The problem was, Martha could brook no criticism whatsoever. So for Chris, it was a course on walking on eggshells 101. In fact, everyone was walking on eggshells because we had heard what a bitch she was. At the same time, Martha continually flirted with all the young men on the crew. Her favorite, though, was a sound technician who had been directed to install a wireless microphone on her body. A truly weird experience because she was extremely sexually aggressive with me, he disclosed. A decision had been made to place the mic on the inside of Martha's thigh rather than under her blouse or in an area of her waist, the usual places for devices. The reason for the lower torso location was that she was going to be walking and talking and would be entirely in the camera frame, and the director didn't want the mic to show. The mic had already been taped around Martha's thigh, and I was asked to adjust it, and Martha was being very aggressively accommodating, the audio guy said. She opened up her skirt and was looking down at me with this very come-hither kind of expression. And she said to me, "Go higher with it if you want. Go ahead. It's okay with me." There were a few people about 6 feet behind us, but only known to both of us was this little exchange going on. I didn't respond to her. I'm a professional. And I was offended by what she was saying because it was such an obviously sexual comment. It was just so ridiculously flirtatious. I could tell she loved me being beneath her, and that she was into real sexual game playing. It was like a power thing with her. I didn't raise the ante. I didn't return the flirtation. Her advice on going higher with the mic would have put it past her garter belt within an inch, to be clinical, of Martha Stewart's vagina. Can I just say real quick, no, color me not surprised. Every time I turn around, there's a new picture of Martha Stewart at her age, in her 80s, posing like this. She thinks that's like real cunning. She thinks that's real sexy. Looking out of her eyelids and pouting her lips. Like, even to this day, Martha Stewart thinks she's way hotter than she is. So, of course, she's going to do like that to some, little sound engineer who, by the way, who's putting a microphone on your thigh under your skirt? Isn't that just going to catch the rustle of your clothing? I mean, obviously, I know nothing. The sound on these videos is whack half the time. But I can't even conceive of putting a microphone on somebody's thigh under their dress. And that's supposed to catch their voice but not catch the rustling of their clothes? I don't get it. Anyway, what a disgusting pig Martha Stewart is. Why would she do that? If someone were to call her on it now, she'd be like, "Well, you just misunderstood. We were just joking. It was nothing. He's nothing, and he can't think because he's stupid." In any event, the aptly titled Holiday Entertaining with Martha Stewart was a complete success. It was shown on a number of public television stations across the country and got good reviews. Newsweek, however, pointed out that Martha had cheerfully used the sponsor's products, though she was careful not to name them, and even roasted a shortening injected butterball instead of a fresh turkey. A serious cook would have been mortified. Nevertheless, the tapes of the program sold well enough that Crown made a deal with Martha for more. WGBH-TV also signed to do another holiday special with her the following year, while Martha announced she had plans for a daily half-hour program of her own. Housewife humorist Irma Bombeck, in her national syndicated At Wit's End column, said she'd seen the show and acknowledged that Martha Stewart had absolutely knocked me out. But she pointed out that the Norman Rockwell scene of Martha's family sitting down to an elegant meal served by a hostess who resembled Loretta Young coming through a door wasn't the way it was in real life. I said to myself, what's wrong with this picture? And then it hit me. There was no television set. She didn't have to lug 14 folding chairs. She didn't have to time the mashed potatoes because Minnesota was on the 3-yard line with a third down and the score tied. I could do a Martha Stewart too if I didn't have a husband in front of a TV set looking so lifeless I once outlined him in chalk. Martha scoffed at Bombeck's glibness. Good or bad, she viewed the column as more publicity for herself. She's about to conquer the world, as she declared in a newspaper interview at the time. The object now is to get as many people as I can. They want to improve their lives. They want to make things look a little nicer. They want to look at a dish and say, "Oh, that's a great dish. I'm going to remember to use that next time." Asked if she thought it incredible that she became an arbiter of taste, Martha declared emphatically, "No, somebody has to." So much for humility, my friends. So much for humility. Martha wouldn't know humility if it slapped her in the face. All right, we have one more chapter. It's entitled Weddings. She is known, I think, mostly for entertaining, and then she had this big weddings book, but just trying to get that off the ground's a hot mess. Now, this is a pretty short chapter, but it's going to sort of catapult us into this, other project that she had going on that, of course, is just a steaming tureen of hot garbage juice. Okay, so this chapter entitled Weddings says that Martha's publisher was overjoyed with the TV show and all the star authors' other high-visibility activities because the bottom line was it sold more books. Almost 1 million of her first 4 books were in print by mid-1986. And the first, Entertaining, had sold well over 300,000 copies, with more printings being ordered. Still, Alan Merkin was daily asking Carol Southern, "So where's Weddings?" A recently inked deal for a syndicated column got Martha's name and pitch in more than 60 newspapers across the country, increasing her following by millions. Still, Carol Southern, under pressure from Alan Merkin, kept asking Martha's editor, Carolyn Hart, "So where's weddings?" There was a waiting list to attend Martha's 3-day entertaining seminars at $1,000 to $1,500 a pop in Westport and in towns and cities around the country. Still, Carolyn Hart, who needed the manuscript yesterday, kept leaving messages on Martha's machine asking, "So where's weddings?" But Martha was just so busy. She had what she described as a back-breaking schedule. To wit, "This week I had my teaching seminar Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. People came in from all over the country. Then Friday morning I had 2 columns to do, so I had to get up at 5 o'clock and write them. And at noon we had to catch a plane for a meeting in San Francisco. Friday night. Saturday, it's like this all the time. It's just really stupid. Saturday we drive to Monterey and at a book signing party in Carmel. Then on Saturday night, I was the judge of a gourmet gala for the March of Dimes and had to give out the prizes and stand next to Clint Eastwood, Mayor Eastwood. Then on Sunday morning, I had a meeting with the people from Sterling Vineyards, where I'm doing another seminar, and then lunch at the Pebble Beach Club, then back to San Francisco. I got home at 3:30 yesterday morning, then had a full day of meetings and went to the New York Antique Show last night. That's the way it is. It's crazy." Well, then, but you are in charge, though, Martha. You just can't say yes to everything. If you say you're going to write a book, there's a contract for you to write this book. I'm sorry, you're going to have to not give out the prizes at the March of Dimes. Martha agreed that yes, she was becoming a star. And with a straight face, she declared, "I'd much rather be anonymous. Because you go and you dress up and people think you're showing off. When I'm writing a book like Weddings, I'm certainly not showing off. I'm writing a real serious book there." I bet. Well, I'm sure you aren't, Martha. I'm sure you've hired some friend. Oh, who might it be? Knowing she couldn't actually write Weddings, Martha and Carol Southern had put pressure on Liz Hawes. No, Liz Hawes is the girl who wrote Entertaining for her. Okay? Remember how that went? And they wanted Liz Hawes to forget all about the past and take on Martha's latest book. "I wanted Liz to write Weddings, and she was very reluctant," Southern said. "She felt she got really screwed by Martha on Entertaining, and I said, 'But Liz, it's such a good subject. If nothing else, you'll have royalties for the rest of your life. This book will be a Bible.'" Hawes was torn. Aside from her past difficulties, she had done considerable research for a book that she wrote later about New York City apartment buildings. But her interest was piqued because Weddings would involve actual reporting and writing and would deal with culture and style. Martha turned on the charm and claimed everything would be different this time. Who would believe it? Who? I'm asking, like, if Martha screws you over so badly like she did the first time with Liz, at this point it's Liz's fault if she decides to get involved with Martha again. Martha says this time it's going to be different. Why believe this horrible wench? Hawes reluctantly agreed after she demanded and got a contract that was more in her favor. "I wanted to be sure I got cover credit," she said. Later, though, Martha again attempted to slither out of that part of the deal. "We knew Weddings would be a big book," Southern said. "We knew we would sell a lot of copies, and we also knew that it was a narrower book than Entertaining. So again, there was nervousness because we were going to price it at $50. And anyway, Martha always made us nervous. She was always making us stretch. There was tremendous pressure to get Weddings in. It was horrible. We wanted to get the book out for Christmas 1986, but we couldn't make it. By that time, Martha's availability was less, and it was just hard to get manuscript written, hard to get Martha to sit down. It was really, really difficult. We would have weekly status meetings where Carolyn Hart and I would meet with Alan Merkin and the production crew. It was, when are we getting captions? We're missing pictures. I mean, it was agony. Having catered hundreds of weddings, Martha had conceived the book knowing that the wedding industry was extremely lucrative, generating billions of dollars annually. Brides, grooms, and their families needed advice. One of the most popular chapters in Entertaining, in fact, was the last one, the at-home wedding. In her files, Martha had socked away hundreds of photographs that had been taken by Andy and others of nuptials that she'd catered, along with detailed notes about them. Much of the raw material already was in the can. Liz Hawes got to work. In some cases, I went back and interviewed those people, and I talked to the bride and the groom about how they reached their decision. I interviewed a lot of tent people and lighting people, and I got their stories. Lots of weddings, though, Martha hadn't catered, and she would do a real convincing number on the families. She'd tell them, "Oh, it's going to be the most beautiful book you've ever seen, and everybody's going to have it, and we're doing the most beautiful job, and we're using the world's most wonderful photographers, and we're recording it as a special chronicle, and you'll want to be a part of this. It won't take anything away from your privacy." People were flattered because she told them that they were planning such beautiful special weddings. But some said, absolutely not. This is my wedding, and it's private. But not too many. Typical Martha, we were on our way to cover a wedding on Martha's Vineyard, and on the way we saw somebody else setting up a tent. Oh, let's go find out who they are, Martha said. Look at that beautiful horse. It'll be a beautiful picture. So Martha jumped out of the car, charmed this young couple, and sure enough, we came back 4 hours later, and were at their wedding, and photographed it, and it's in the book. One wedding that Martha desperately wanted included, because of the glitz and glamour, was that of Sophie Desmarais, the beautiful daughter of a rich and powerful Kennedy-esque Canadian family, to the young man named Michael Caine. The dramatic ceremony was held in Montreal's 17th century Notre Dame Church, and the celebration at the Museum of Fine Arts. She finally got in through the help of Jean-Francois de Greyond, who designed the wedding. Most of the time, Hawes worked alone with a photographer. Martha was extremely busy with other projects and was getting even busier. She was working on several other books. She was moving forward with her TV deals and her videotapes. There were periods when we'd go months without talking. And certainly there were times when we needed to get together and couldn't because she just wasn't available. Well, that's where we have to stop today. I mean, I can't help but roll my eyes at the end of one of these sessions spent with Martha. What a horrible wench. I think the story that blew me away today was a story about her coming on to that poor sound guy. I mean, she is a devious character, is she not? She's up to all kinds of filth, and not just mistreating people. Lord knows what she was doing in her private time. And she has 1,000 daggers to throw at Andy when he leaves. Hold on to your butts for that chapter. But she, I mean, I just can guarantee that if people had been approaching her, or if she wanted to approach somebody else, we're supposed to believe she was faithful to Andy the entire time they were together. She wasn't even faithful to him like a couple of years into their marriage. We know she wasn't. We know that when she was a stockbroker, she was hanging out with all sorts of characters, letting all sorts of things happen. And if Andy had said boo, it would have been like, don't question me, Andy. Well, but then when he finds out that he, wasn't exactly faithful to her and was getting together with Robin, then she's wounded, she's hurt. But like, Martha, there's so many indications all along the way that you were looking for a little attention from the men as well. Even throwing yourself at this young innocent who's been tasked with the egregious task of getting anywhere near your, what? Can you imagine? Ugh, yuck. Anyway, I'll see you again tomorrow for another chapter of Martha Stewart. Tomorrow, she's going to try to get a deal with Kmart. How the mighty have fallen. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.